Hello and welcome to the Argyle CIO Leadership Forum. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunskill with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. Just a couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel speakers. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience today. At any time during the event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page. To ask questions throughout this session and all sessions, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this panel, Jyotsa Sharma, Head of Data and Analytics at Mars. We are so excited to have Jyotsa with us and our panelists with us for a discussion titled Vision 2023, Digital Dexterity Challenges, Trends, and Priorities. Welcome, Jyotsa. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Vicki. Hi, everyone. Vicki gave a quick introduction. I'll just also give you a little bit intro about my background. So I've been at Mars, but before that, I've had around 15 years of experience, primarily in analytics at both corporate settings and consulting firms. Right before Mars, my more recent experience was in leading teams for marketing strategy and analytics at Macy's. Then I switched over to consulting at PwC, working with clients in retail and CPG sector. So that's a little bit about me. I'm really excited to moderate this session. And with that, I would like to give the floor to our esteemed panel, Peter and Sasi, so that they can introduce themselves. Over to you, Peter.
Okay, thank you. Pete Gibson. Quickly, I was CIO at Alamo National Car Rental, CTO at Wyndham Hotel Group, CIO at Bridge Street, ran an IT outsourcing company in Shanghai where we built Walmart.com, Red Prairie, Agilysys, and so forth. And just got done turning around Friendlies and Johnny Rockets. Before all this, I was in the U.S. Navy. I had responsibility for the developing and running the U.S. Navy's Tomahawk cruise missile program and UAV program.
Thank you, Peter. Over to you, Sasi.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be on the panel with my colleagues here, and thank you, Vicki Lynn, for arranging this. Currently, I am the Vice President and CIO at the University of Nevada, Reno. And prior to that, I spent about 7 years having the same position at Washington State University. But most of my career I spent at NASA. The last position I held there was I was the agency CTO for IT. And prior to that, I was the CIO in one of the NASA centers. So glad to be here and to talk with you about digital dexterity.
Yeah, thank you for your introductions. We have a good balance here with both, representation from Ed, NASA. Sasi was an exciting experience for you, I'm sure, and then Pete from the corporate world. I think first of all, we would like to begin with our first question, which is, how do we define digital dexterity? So before I ask you some of the specific questions around that, my interpretation of the situation is that there is usually an organization where there are individuals or certain teams and groups where inevitably they have to adapt to new technology. And how do you ensure that some of that proficiency and skills are being developed to get better outcomes? But I would also like to hear your perspective. So, Sasi, would you like to go first and tell us a little bit about how you define digital dexterity as you've moved around along these experiences at both NASA and now in the education sector at University of Nevada?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. So digital dexterity, in my opinion, takes many different forms. Some people basically define it as low as able to use the new, more modern end user devices, whether it's an iPhone or an Android device or a laptop or running Windows or Mac OS and things like that. To me, that's basically the lowest form of digital dexterity. And I think we see that in our incoming students. They're quite proficient in use of that and other social media platforms. But in my humble opinion, I don't equate that to having what I would call the full qualifications of have total digital dexterity. It's the ability to completely and totally function in a digital world, that you can function without any of the physical things, intangible things that you would get. But at the end of the day, you also need to be proficient in analyzing the data that you get from multiple sources. In the old days, we used to go to the library, read the books, and then try to figure out how those books are communicating different thoughts and so on and so forth. But now in the digital world, any information, anyone with any of these devices are an instant publisher. They can take videos, put their notes on it, and so on and so forth. So in my mind, there's also another component of what I call digital dexterity. It's not about technology. It's about analyzing what you can get from all the different sources and being able to try to get to the authoritative source, and not be confused with everything. You know, in the old days, we used to say, if it's written down, it's a fact. But unfortunately, people say, "Oh, I found it on the internet. It must be true." So teaching our incoming student something about understanding how information flows and your responsibility to analyze and get to the bottom of it before you start sending it to your friends and family.
No, that's absolutely perfect and on point. I would just like to add here that last week I was with one of my friends. She had a daughter who was 10 years old, and she was, I don't know, to your definition, we wouldn't call it digitally dexterous, but she was very adept at using, you know, TikTok and some of the newer technologies, but can, with the social media and a lot of misinformation out there, how can they parse all of that information to make the right choices and the right platform for themselves? So that's a very interesting thought that you said there. Pete, I just wanted to make sure that I also capture your thoughts. I know you've moved along different organizations, and we're talking about people who are younger, who join universities, and how digitally dexterous they are versus, you know, in corporations, you have entry-level folks coming right from college down to the C-suite who is much more experienced, and all of them at different levels of digital dexterity. So how would you, from your experience, define digital dexterity?
Yeah, I look at it as the ability for an organization to adapt newer technology, and how quickly can they implement appropriate business solutions to better the business. And it could also be legacy technology, a re-enhancement of legacy technology too that is applied towards that. So I look at it, and it's not, Sasi was spot on, it's not necessarily tech. It is the ability of the organization. So tech has got to start looking bigger than just, you know, the iPads and the endpoints and the servers and things of that nature. They got to look at how do they get the users to adopt to it. So I probably date myself a little bit here, but back in the old ERP days, 50% of the projects failed, not because the ERP system was bad. It was because we did not take into account the user's role in the new ERP. So a person in the supply chain was used to moving paper. We give them an ERP system, and excuse the language, but they kind of puked all over it because it says it doesn't help me do my job. And the reason it didn't help me do the job, because no one ever explained to the person what the newer technology can go do. So as we do project plans and implement technology and so forth, we've got to really be able to take the user into account to have a digitally dexterous organization.
Yeah, no, that is pretty insightful. And I'm thinking, as these companies are trying to become digital first, either they're using the traditional enterprise resource planning software that you were mentioning, or even trying to adapt the new generation technologies. One of the what are some of the main challenges that you just talked about, one about changing the user mindset, but what are some of these challenges which you have encountered that hinder people, and you're not able to encourage that digital first mindset throughout that organization?
You want me to go next?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I want to follow up what Pete said, even though he said it dates him and so on and so forth. The issue that he brought up, we are still wrestling with that. I mean, I can give a good example. When we went through the pandemic, we put together a crash course, not for just for students, but also for the faculty, to let them know all the various tools and technologies we had available, And many of them were completely floored by the availability of these technologies. But the difference was twofold, because as an IT organization, we also have the habit of saying, we deliver the technology, the project is successful. And that is one thing I keep beating into my staff every day. The project is only successful if not only we deliver technology, that's only half the problem that we have solved. The other half is adoption. And if we don't do, and IT organizations are notorious just for delivering technology and walking away and assuming it's intuitive, and just like we absorb it, everybody else should do that. So the faculty in this particular case was totally floored and surprised with all the capabilities we had. And their question, oh, did you guys just implement this last week? We said, no, we had it for a couple of years. We tried. But so there's a failing on both the community at large and the failing on the IT organization when you do not follow through and implement adoption. So to me, that is a huge necessary first step. I mean, it's happening even today. So it's with us, and it's only going to change if the constituents and the technology providers have a change of heart and make it a deliberate process in both in change management and adoption as part of the project management delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that will ring a bell with a lot of leaders where, they get very excited about a new technology and then they don't think that long-term view and become very short-term focused to think that it's a no-brainer, right? The organizations, it's a brilliant idea, you'll see massive adoption, and after a few months, that isn't what happens, and they keep wondering why they did not invest in adoption, like you rightly said. So I'm just going to put this other question out there, and feel free to pick it up. Beyond some of these ROI measures, because at the end of the day, everybody will say we are either consumer focused or financially driven. So when we think about ROI and there's so much emphasis on it, what are some of the benefits beyond the return on investment when you think about making an organization as they go on the journey of becoming more digitally aware and dexterous? I'm not going to call out, but happy
go ahead, Pete. You go first.
Whoever would like to
answer. Well, and this is what it kind of gets interesting. We in IT always have these big buzzwords. The current big buzzword right now is digitally dexterous, as compared to many years ago it was big data, and before that it was something else. But so again, so we kind of morphed this a little bit into digitally dexterous at the enterprise level, or down at the tactical, at the associate level, right? So, but I think at the enterprise level or at the business level, it's quicker time, it's quicker time to market, it's increased revenue, it is performance bottom line type items. When you get down to the user level, then we're talking about, enhancements to quality of life, easier to do your work and things of that nature. And they all have value. The challenge is how do you get this to apply across the organization? And I think we'll be talking about that later on, which is the really big challenge. How do you take this 10,000-foot concept and really make it apply without, you go down, and we always go from the 10,000 foot down to the ground level, but we forget all the operational level in between there to make it effective. And we'll talk about that coming up, I believe.
Awesome. No, thank you so much. And Sasi, do you have any thoughts on how, some of the metrics which Pete talked about, right? Quicker time to insights and some of those productivity metrics, but how else do you envision when we think beyond ROI and some of the benefits that an educational institution or just corporates can reap from being digitally dexterous?
Yeah, so one of the things, we have been automating and providing what I would call comprehensive solutions. But to me, they are all very siloed approaches to that experience. So one of the things that if you know that as an organization, as an enterprise, you have digital dexterity, is knowing that multiple applications behind the scenes can talk to each other. So for example, if I were just using our own personal experience with a smartphone, there are individual applications that do their job quite well, but the value of it is when it gets integrated. So I can have, Pete in my contact list, and if I have his address, I can immediately go to the app and navigate to his physical location. And there are many other things where the data gets integrated behind the scene. So I do not consider an enterprise to be digitally mature if the only thing they have done is what I would call point by point has converted part of their data stream into it. It's how the multiple data streams work together that make a huge difference in terms of both the value the user perceives and receives, and that whole experience takes it to a new level. My favorite saying is, every company, whether you're manufacturing tires or in the restaurant business, is a technology company. And if you don't believe that, then I think your time as an enterprise is significantly diminished, because people are looking for this richer experience.
Yeah. No, I think you're completely on point there, because I can just speak from what we are trying to do here at Mars. We were, traditionally trying to prioritize speed over scale. And as we were moving ahead and developing these point solutions, we were, very expert focused in certain areas with different level of maturity. But if you think about it, when you try to sell an M&Ms, the consumer doesn't know that, are you talking to the marketing department? Are you talking to the supply department? And what we saw in COVID was that you could have a great revenue management strategy, but if you don't have the supply to back it up, it doesn't translate into a good consumer experience, or as consumer moves along that journey, right? You might get a bad review. So it's all very interconnected, right? What you were trying to say with that iPhone example, that it's not about being very great at one part of the technology. How do you interconnect to build this connected decision ecosystem or connected data layering or data foundation that enables that one view for your end consumer? That's really interesting.
Let me see if I can't. I'm going to pose a question to the audience here. So you're CIO at a struggling restaurant company, and then all of a sudden the pandemic hits. Your company's not profitable. And all of a sudden the pandemic hits, and I'm not going to say we, but this is, you can see where the example is coming from. And in New England, they shut down the restaurants. What do you do? So when we talk about digital dexterity, what do you as the CIO and the executive team go do? Because they've laid it out very well for us here. So of course, we had fortunate enough that we had already had a delivery in place, because I brought all that from the hotel industry over. But it's just not the technology. Yeah, that's the backbone of it, right? But the ops guys got to go do that. So what does it mean in the digital world? What is the marketing guide? How are you going to do delivery service, a different type of branding? How are you going to do HR, the people working at home and all the COVID and the pandemic? And then how can you go do that within 15 days to save your company? Mm-hmm. And that is digital dexterity this day and age, to go do that. And the major piece behind that, of course, is the IT organization. I'm very proud of that. But that's just exactly what Jasna said, was it takes everybody to have a digitally dexterous organization.
Yeah, that's a completely great point that you made over there. And it will resonate with a lot of us, when especially in pandemic, the restaurant industry faced such a tight crunch, and just like being, just trying to be safe, and how, some of the other platforms that came up, the examples of DoorDash, for example, and some of these restaurants turn into just, they would call it like the kitchen setup, right? Where people are not coming in, but they are enabling it with their existing logistic services. Suddenly you see a technology company enabling the logistics of an existing business. So it's also what you mentioned about, how do you make sure that the different parts of your organization are there, and how can you plug and play into some of those partnerships that are suddenly coming up from outside and their business model are working well. So maybe there's an opportunity to look at that outside the organization as well.
Yeah, there are. So, I mean, you've got to have, part of this is you have to allow people in the organization to play with new technology. And so they can understand the capability of it. And man, we live in the software as a service world. You can whip out the credit card and get a new capability in there. Well, that kind of, and you got to be cautious of that approach a little bit because, you know, we live in the do not trust world right now on security side of this. And then again, you don't want all your tech costs to explode with everyone doing their own thing. So how do you go manage that? You do at the enterprise level, you're probably entering new capability through a project management approach of getting everybody to work together and giving that new capability, the new technology.
Yeah.
So it's a balancing act on the digital dexterity.
Absolutely. Perfect. So see, I would also like to hear from you whether there are some practical ways where when outside of the IT department, as Pete was mentioning, it's the other ops groups, but how do the employees can feel empowered and supported to learn some of the new skills as they are trying to adopt these new technologies?
Yeah, this is like I was saying earlier, we discussed that this adoption is not going to happen by accident. You know, it has to be a deliberate part of the technology delivery program, whatever the project it is. So if you're going to convert your environment to use a more modern ERP system, just by delivering that and giving people access to it with a user ID and password, nothing is going to change. The other thing we have not spent time talking about is the mindset of our employees and helping them to change the mindset, because many of these programs and solutions we have deployed sort of forces them to change their business processes. So especially when you're adopting things software as a service, I have to tell people, you know, the best technologies or processes have already been programmed in. We are not going to do any customizations at all. In fact, what you need to focus on is what are the outcomes that you need to be able to do your function. So that is actually remapping and how they work. So now there are two things that the individual or employee has to wrestle with. Mastering new technology, and then basically reinventing or reusing the processes that has been already been programmed in the ERP that you have purchased. And so now, if you think about it, this is asking a human being who might have been doing the same thing the last 10 or 15 years a certain way to significantly change. Unfortunately, we on the tech side, we do not spend enough time understanding that component of the human difficulty of being able to change. So we spend a lot of time about technology, but we hardly spend any time about changing the hearts and minds of people and how we can help them with that. It's almost like having a counseling session with the employees to help them get over this hump, because otherwise you'll find ERP systems, I think Pete mentioned this, people have spent millions of dollars and basically nothing has changed in the organization.
Or they have gone bankrupt and just trying to implement an ERP.
That too.
That's management happen
Yeah.
too.
And
Yeah.
then unfortunately, people say, well, that's because the technology was poor. It's actually because we didn't spend just as much energy and resources for improving and helping with the adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you mentioned here is also about not just technology. There is the ops part, which Pete mentioned. Then there's a business process change management that we talked about that needs to happen. So it's not just about a leader in the CTO organization or CIO, for example, sponsoring this new ERP technology. It's about, you know, how do you drive that change mindset? So one of the things that we like to talk about in our organization is this picture of, you know, there's an elephant and on top of that there's a human pointing a direction. So oftentimes what happened is, like, as a CIO, or for example, and coming from analytics world, you know, relatively more technology focused, you would feel that it's a no-brainer. An organization should adopt it, and you will realize that the rest of the organization is moving at an elephant pace. And like you were describing, Sasi, earlier, was that it fundamentally changes how people work. And at times, you know, they are threatened that, will I lose my job? And believe it or not, you'll see a lot of resistance, especially when some of that happens, and a lack of clarity also of what their new org structure or roles and responsibilities are going to be. So I think a lot of fear or uncertainty, you know, stems from that. And if managed properly, it's probably you know, one area where we are able to make those employees feel empowered.
Yeah, I think Yeah, also, let's keep it up. So this is the leadership challenge of being a technology executive. You have got to set in the organization the ability for people to play with new technology. And that might mean you gotta kick it, say, hey, go out and go try this, or allow them to go try that. And so you as the leader have kind of got to de-risk this, say it's okay for you to go play with it. And if it fails, that's kind of okay. Oh, by the way, he says, well, I might need like $50. And you go, okay, go spend $50. I'll cover you on your expense report. Okay. But let's keep it above board. And this isn't a major program. This is what I actually call, we're prototyping this. And so we can control it. And if it looks good, then we'll play with it later on. And I mean, a CIO, one of the things I always need is options. But let me also kind of say that this isn't new. One of the biggest things that for digital dexterity done by an organization was done by Google. Now, we don't have the same thing they did, but we do remember it in a little different way. You remember it as, and see if I've got this right, every associate in Google had 2 hours to play with.
Yeah.
And they were able to create a lot of new products out of it. Now, we don't have the luxury. You can't go to Mars and say, everyone gets 2 hours free. You'll go hit the street real quickly on that one, right?
Yeah.
But you've got to be able to set that type of a culture for people to play with new technology, explore, read a business book. I'll cover you on a business book if you read it, right? And explore new areas that may benefit the company and may benefit them. And you've got to set this culture for them. Now, it's easy for me to say that as, being a CIO and all the other stuff, but I would challenge every one of you that, yeah, you can't control anything outside the lines of your organization, but you can set this up inside your own little department. If you have a team of 5 or 10, you set the attitude to go do that. You set the service levels for these guys to go do that. And I will tell you that if you start doing that, it becomes infectious inside your greater department and inside the organization.
Yeah, that's great advice, Pete. So a couple of things that I have practiced with my staff along the same lines and helped out is, no matter which organization you're in, there are always what I call lead users who are pushing the envelope. So one of the things I try to find out in any environment, who those lead users are. And they're actually very forgiving. I mean, when I'm running a 24/7 type of operation for the masses, they require that level of service levels. However, when I work with lead users, they're willing to experiment and then with low risk, and they're willing to take risk. And they want an IT partner who's able to take risk with that. The advantage of doing that is once we identify what are the promising methodologies, processes, or technologies, then we can actually come up with how do I make it enterprise-wide beneficial to the enterprise. So that's one thing. Second thing I do is with my employees on an annual review process, and I tell them ahead of time, I'm going to ask you, what have you learned in the last year that is different from what you have been doing every year? And I tell them ahead of time, I'm going to ask you that question. It's like an open book exam, right? So you should have a credible answer. So if you said, well, I haven't learned anything new in the last year, that's not a good answer. So then my question is, why? Is there anything that I can provide in terms of resources so that you are able to learn, so you don't have to have an answer, then you can have a more positive answer. So again, both these ideas actually help promote more customer focus in an IT organization.
Yeah. Yes. And I think, so see, to your point, I have seen it in both in 2 organizations primarily that I can think of. At PwC, we had this continuing professional education where, no matter what level you are, you could be a partner or you could be a new joining associate. Everybody had to take a certain level of credit. So, there's this digital upskilling that would happen, and you were allowed to learn new technologies, and there's no compulsion to really implement right away. But as you don't have that pressure and you're learning and experimenting, next time you're on a client engagement, you would remember to do something that will make your productivity easier, right? And the second context of what Pete was earlier mentioning about trying to de-risk, in my organization, we are experimenting, which I'll get to my next question very soon with both of you, would be, we are experimenting with Gen AI. And when we began, there was so much of excitement and there was so much of fear at the same time. Because if you would see in the news, I believe it was Samsung employees, right, who inadvertently leaked confidential information about their organization as they were trying to experiment. So to Pete's earlier point, how do you develop that, de-risk it so that while they're trying to play around and being the, what Sasi was mentioning, the leaders of technology, right, the early adopters, and they are able to play in that safe environment, test it out in a smaller scale. And if it works, then sure enough, go and scale it to a broader scope. But how do we make sure that some of these newer technologies that are out there, Gen AI is one of them, but in the broader umbrella of the artificial intelligence, do you think that they are a big game changer today? And if so, what do you think are the biggest benefits of AI for IT leaders?
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
to go on this one first.
so if you're particularly talking about generative AI, I mean, AI in some form has been what we used to loosely call, used to exist. Working with data and then coming up with predictive analytics, we used to call that a smart method of AI. But what generative AI is a completely different animal. And it is one of these things in my mind, is you get back more than what you put into it. Whereas when you look at data analytics and so on and so forth, you only get back what you basically put into it, with some exceptions. So generative AI, it is a great technology, but like with every technology, it has its benefits and it has perils associated with it. So it needs to be handled appropriately. So it requires a little bit more caution. It's a little bit more dangerous to work with generative AI than compared to some of the other things we have done in the past, because its ability for a runaway kind of situation, where things could get really out of hand in terms of not maybe even using what I would call legal methodologies or privacy related stuff and cybersecurity. You can go on, and then the whole issue of inappropriate bias in the environment that gets captured into Gen AI. I mean, so in my mind, generative AI requires a little bit more study, a little bit more what I would call deliberative attempt to harness its benefits, but its benefits are huge. The other way to look at generative AI is not something that, like everything else with computers, we have to have human in the loop in some capacity. So generative AI could help people do some of the more drudgery type of work very well, but even not just drudgery, even what if type of analysis, it can help you tremendously with that. But I always feel that it cannot be just something that you turn loose and then you walk away from it.
It has to be monitored, yeah, and bring in that human feedback loop into it to make sure that it's what you said earlier, right? Not either having bias or hallucinating completely something different.
Yeah.
This could have a dramatic results or impact. So Pete, on I know we're talking specifically about generative AI, but generative AI is a component of like the broader artificial intelligence, which includes, Sasi was saying, machine learning, predictive analytics, there are deep learning. How have you felt that just adopting some of the artificial intelligence being beneficial, and especially in the IT department?
That's huge. I'm always been bullish on analytics, especially predictive analytics and understanding it. But and so it is a new, what I'm going to actually call it, arrow in our quiver of tools that we can go use. What I often find is people don't understand it. They get into it at the top level, and we use AI or generative AI. And then I'm going to go to you as a technical executive, and I'm going to go, how do you develop the solution? How do you get it? How do you know if it's good, or how do you know if it's bad? How do you know all the details of it? So again, I'm an analytics guy, and I like to use a methodology to take analytic solutions to market called CRISP-DM. It was developed out of IBM, and it's a really good methodology about data cleaning and making sure that it's all right. So if I was to ask you as that tech exec, you think AI is good, Yep, there are lots of them out there, but help me understand, how do we go do it, the algorithm, and these type things, as they said, is it's not a swirl the ocean technology. We are solving a specific business problem, and you've got to make sure your algorithms and everything are all correct. So with that being said, how do you go do it? And you as a tech executive have got to just like being able to develop an application, you've got to understand how you can go and apply that technology and learn how to go do that. And then you can understand the illities of it. Let's try it another way. You may not be developing a solution. You might be doing package procurement of a AI solution. Do you really know what you're getting? Listen to Saucy and Justin, they're both in that arena, but you talk to them, they say one little change will give you a completely different solution. That one little change could be a bias. Oh, by the way, the market changes and all the models start having trouble. How do you do model maintenance in the package you're going to provide, especially when it's critical like pricing, supply chain, or something of that nature? So I encourage you, you've got to learn it and just not talk about it at the top level of AI and the big lingo stuff. You've got to really know how to go do it and all the different bits and pieces of it so you can talk the talk.
Yeah, no, perfect, absolutely on point. And I know we are almost on time, where we would like to also turn to the floor to audience for audience questions. So I'll just go and pick some of them as they're coming in. I think this first question is about, does having an on-premise compute resource enhance digital performance as opposed to going to cloud exclusively? So I think
Could you read that question again? Sorry.
the question is talking about when we have on-premise compute resources, does that enhance digital performance and dexterity as opposed to moving to cloud exclusively? So if you think of, there are a couple of examples out there where they were on-premise software before, and now we have a software as a service, like, or maybe a cloud solution there. Do we think that one or the other enhances the digital dexterity?
Yeah.
It's
So
not an either.
go
Go ahead,
ahead.
Tom.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pete.
I don't think it's an either or. I don't look at it. It is how can you get solutions to market quick enough to support your initiative? If that's cloud, have at it. And you have the infrastructure to contain the cloud. If it's on-prem, have at it. Is how quickly can you get that quality solution? And as we said earlier, work with all the other parts of it and do user training and do all these things to get people to adopt the technology. So I don't necessarily get in the debate of cloud, non-cloud. I know a lot of people that went 100% cloud, and they're running out of cloud so fast right now because the costs are high because they didn't take a lot into consideration. So look at the technology solution versus the bits and bytes on how you got there.
Absolutely.
No, I agree with Pete. I mean, to me, whether you use the cloud or not is really a sourcing decision.
Right.
Now, one advantage of the cloud, it depends upon which cloud you're in. There are other tools that you can more easily integrate with, and that's the question you need to ask. It's always starting with end in mind first, and then say, how do we work backwards to really get to that end point? And then you make your choices along the way. So I find integrating data that you have within your organization with externally available data, that creating that secret sauce, if you want to think of it that way, really deliver far better results rather than just staying in a siloed environment. So those are the kind of things that you might want to think about.
Absolutely. That's very good, well answered. So I think we'll take up another question. How do you believe enhancing digital dexterity within the organization can lead to innovation and improved productivity? And what specific steps are being taken to foster a digitally agile workforce?
Well, part of it is you have to move your operations, like we talked about, into a technology-based methodologies. I mean, if you're not doing that today, the next step is very difficult to realize. But then again, we also talked about the human challenges about change management and helping people along with the new way of doing things. To me, that is just as important as technology delivery.
Yes. I think, to add to what Sasi was saying, we discussed earlier in our conversation that it's not just the top-down leadership buy-in, which is important, but it is also taking that elephant that we talked about, right? How the organization, the people in their lives, and the way they work at the company gets impacted by it, and how do we build those business processes so that there is not just these specific tools, but like the processes, the proficiency of people, are we giving them the right kind of training to be able to operate at that level? What are some of the specific culture of the organization? Does it come top down, goes bottoms up? And a combination of all this is what we think of as a capability. So it's not about just the specific technology or the tools, it's a mixture of the system or the technology plus that human element and the organization and the processes ops part of it that is able to move the needle. Right, so I think there are more questions coming in. So another question is paying attention to the user really about UI or UX or EX, which is more important? And are there some KPIs for digital dexterity? Interesting. I think there were some KPIs that we did mention, beyond ROI that can give some of that answer, like time to insights and quicker turnarounds. But Pete and Sasi, like, happy to hear from you. How would you like to think of certain KPIs that can measure this digital dexterity in the organization?
It's not. As I did some research on this, and you come back with things like, well, you can do a survey of the organization, and you can do this, and you can do that. So there's not really a solid KPI. And you can start using some on the side to average time to market for your solutions, i.e. from your project management team, time tickets, things of that type of stuff. There's nothing really solid. The best I can go do is, again, this is about an attitude, and to me, it's about ideas. How are we harvesting the ideas? And then how are we, when we get an idea from a user, how do we go action that idea? Again, it doesn't have to be big, it should be a little bit. So it could be smaller than we think. It's like at the end of a service desk ticket, you say, how do we do? Were we fast? Were we accurate? So forth. As they do, how can you better use technology? And we start harvesting those ideas, and then we go back to them and say, here are things that we can do, and you can do this at the enterprise level. And the other thing is that 50% of a technology's job is not running your organization; it's working with your customers. Talk to your customers about what are your business challenges, what are your business needs, and that's where the idea comes from. At the end of the day, the concept of digital dexterity is going to tax the service side of any IT organization. How quickly can you get solutions out there? Here, find business problems, have options for the business, and then when they select it, being able to get it out the door. When you start doing that and your impact for the organization, you will become digitally dexterous. Now, I go into tough situations sometimes, companies that can't get applications out the door, spending millions of dollars, and their CFO is yelling, we're wasting money, this, that, and the other. And IT is relegated to the back room. When you start doing a good job, you start going into, more of a strategic posture. One of the little simplest KPIs that I kind of measure, not really a KPI, that I measure, that when we got there is when there's a new initiative in the company, where does the first or the second phone call go to? So I'll give you a solid example. Ghost kitchens. The first phone call went to the CFO. The second phone call went to the CIO. Why? We can do the technology solution, but we also have program and project management. So business, just not the technology side of it, but I can get the marketing guys in on the project team. I can get the accounting guys on the project team. I get them all in. And it's IT adding a new function to the organization. So that you look for those little type indicators to see if you are really starting to become digitally dexterous. And yeah, do your survey. But if you do a survey, most people are going to say, ah, it's the IT guys. They want another piece of admin to go do it. I got to spend 5 minutes to go do this dang on survey. So I go click, 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 and I'm done. Okay, have at it.
No, that's really great to hear from you, Pete. I think there are more questions coming in, but in the interest of time, I would like to wrap it up and hand it back to Vicky. But yeah, it was a great honor to moderate the session with Pete and Sasi, and looking forward to hearing from you further. Over to you, Vicky.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What a terrific panel. I know we could have gone on longer, and hopefully if we can, we'll get some of those questions over to you. The next thing I just wanted to say that I want to thank everyone else for joining us today also for the session, and thank you again to Sasi, Jyotsna, and Pete for participating, and to let you know that this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Thank you again.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.